Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for this month's Intro to Fundraising and Ask Me Anything event. My name is Jake O'Shea. I'm Capital Factory's Investor Relations Manager, where I lead our investor relations team helping Capital Factory portfolio companies prepare for and ultimately execute on institutional fundraisers from venture capitalists. Today, we're going to be hearing from Matt Conwell, an emerging fund manager at RareBreed Ventures. Mac's got a really interesting story and some unique insights into venture funding that I'm really excited to dive into. But before we start, we have Capital Factory founder and CEO Josh Baer here to tell us a little bit more about what Capital Factory is and what our mission is.
Howdy, my name is Joshua Baer, and I'm the founder and CEO of Capital Factory. Capital Factory is the center of gravity for entrepreneurs in Texas, the #1 state for startups in the US. Thousands of entrepreneurs, programmers, and designers gather day and night, in person and online, for meetups, classes, and co-working. With boots on the ground in Austin, Dallas, and Houston, we meet the best entrepreneurs in Texas and introduce them to their first investors, employees, mentors, and customers. Capital Factory has invested in more than 300 Texas startups over the past decade. Whether physically in person or virtually online, Capital Factory is buzzing with energy and activity every day. Start with all the geekiest events on meetup.com and sprinkle in out-of-town guests, book signings, hackathons, innovation conferences, and pitch events. We're talking about thousands of participants every month. Most of the events are free, open to the public, and streamed over the internet. Capital Factory is all about community. Everyone's here to meet other people who can help them on their journey or to help others find their way. We kick off every morning with a text-based Ask Me Anything session with a mentor or investor in our Slack channel. Anyone in our community can ask questions in real time, and everyone else can see the answers. These are some of the most active investors and the most successful entrepreneurs in Texas. Those same mentors and investors do regular office hours where they volunteer a few hours a month. It's easy for any of our community members to find people with specific interests or expertise and to book a 30-minute meeting with them. With hundreds of mentors and investors in the network, there are dozens of meetings happening every day. Our co-working space provides desks, offices, conference rooms, classrooms, a podcast room, a video conferencing booths, and more. But the most important spot is the kitchen, because that's where everybody comes together. That's the real reason everyone's here, to meet each other. And every day at Capital Factory is Demo Day. Maybe it's the local angel investor network or a venture capitalist from out of town. Maybe it's one of the Fortune 500 scouts looking for new tech or a state or federal government official. It's delegations from other countries, school kids, army generals, and celebrities. We've helped entrepreneurs get in front of Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google, and even President Obama. How do we know who to put in front of the president? Well, first, they go through an intensive interview and assessment process where they're vetted by our staff and our mentor network. We categorize them by industry and technology and score them based on traction and potential. Then they have to work their way up to the top. On the way, they'll often meet with members of our Innovation Council of Fortune 500 scouts looking for startups with technology that can give the big companies a competitive advantage. They're hanging out in the kitchen of the co-working space and in our Slack channels online. They partner with startups to go after big government contracts with the Army Futures Command, Air Force Ventures, and the Texas Military Department. The money is flowing. In the past year, 30 startups in our community received more than $60 million in non-dilutive funding through government programs. Capital Factory is also the official Google Tech Hub for Texas. Google plugs us into a global network of other entrepreneurial communities and creates unique opportunities to help our startups attract investors, increase diversities, and access Google services. All of this activity creates exclusive deal flow and data for our investment fund. Our goal is to invest in the best deals in Texas, no matter who leads them. Over the past 10 years, we've secured $110 million in pro rata, super pro rata, and follow-on rights in more than 600 companies. We watch them all interact with our mentors, investors, Innovation Council, and each other, so we know which ones to invest in. Some of our most successful companies include Aceable, Coder, Data.World, Icon, Sensei, Storable, and WP Engine. Are you ready to quit your job and become an entrepreneur? Do you know someone who is? That's who I want to meet. And those are the kind of people who I can introduce you to. You can message me directly on Twitter at Joshua Bear or email me at josh@quityourjob.com.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Josh. Always great to hear from you. I think one piece of Capital Factory that Josh didn't touch on, but I think is definitely worth mentioning is something called the Texas Startup Manifesto. So this has really been our guiding principle for the last 5 years at Capital Factory. And what the Texas Startup Manifesto is it's essentially a thesis that says, taken individually, it's really hard for Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, Austin, any part of Texas to really compete with somewhere like San Francisco or New York City. But taken together, if we can, take the resources that Austin has and help connect them to the resources in Dallas and, help a startup founder in Houston raise capital in Austin and hire talent from Dallas, if we can really become the connectors and connect all those pieces together, that ecosystem would be able to rival any in the world, including the Bay Area and New York City. So that's really what we've been head down focused on here at Capital Factory for the last 5 years. We have full-time employees and office space in Dallas, Houston, and Austin at this point. I'm today wearing our Dallas branded t-shirt based on the Pegasus from Pegasus Park over at Dallas. And really that kind of informs everything we do. Capital Factory is meant to be connectors and, really help different resources talk together and really, cement our place as the center of gravity for entrepreneurs in Texas. But that's enough about Capital Factory. You guys all came here to hear from Matt Conwell. So before I invite him on stage, I want to give a little bit of background. So McKeever Conwell is a software engineer by trade. He was a former DoD contractor with actually top secret security clearance, two-time founder with an exit, and he calls it a failure. I call it something that just didn't work out the way he planned. Following that, Mac moved on into the venture capital world. He was part of the Maryland Technology Development Corporation as part of their seed investment team. During his 4 years over there, Mac amassed a wealth of experience leading an initiative to actually create the Minority Business Pre-Seed Fund, which is the first and only at the time state-backed pre-seed fund specifically focused on funding women and minorities within the county. That program essentially institutionalized the Friends and Family Round for Black, minority, and women-led startups and was subsequently funded long-term by the entire state of Maryland and that state government. In September of 2020, Mac founded RareBreed VC, which is a pre-seed fund investing in exceptional founders outside of the large tech ecosystems. So with that, I'm really, really excited to bring Mac to the virtual stage. Mac, how's it going? How are you?
It's going pretty good. Thank you for that introduction.
Absolutely. It's really, really great to see you here today. I hope your weather is a little bit better than it is over here in Austin. We've got freezing weather and rain at the same time, so that's never fun.
We have snow, so there's a good 3 or 4 inches of snow outside. So I'm pretty sure you're doing better than me right now.
I feel bad for complaining immediately. Oh man. Well, thanks so much for joining us today, Mac. I think to start off, you have a really unique path that ended up leading you to venture capital and specifically to founding and starting RareBreed. So to start off, I really just kind of want to give the audience a little bit of insight into how you got to where you are today. So can you tell us kind of the story of what inspired you to go out and found RareBreed Ventures?
Yeah, so if we cut to the investing part of my career, I'm working for the state of Maryland, and I create this pre-seed fund to support underrepresented founders, and I was still having the issue of finding amazing founders that I couldn't bring into back. It didn't matter how great the idea was. It didn't matter how amazing the founder was. Our deal flow was hot enough that we had enough companies that had, significant traction where we were being traction led. And I didn't know if that was always the right strategy, right? Another cybersecurity company that has some traction. Well, that's cool. But, somebody building something completely innovative and different and truly unique. We're early investors. Why can't we take a shot on something like that? We're investing on the state. And it came from 2 founders, really. And so one was a woman in Baltimore who I tried to support for almost 3.5 years, and nobody wanted to back what she was doing. So she went as far as to become a surrogate mother to be able to pay to have a prototype built. That was disheartening. And then the other founder who changed my life, who's actually a Capital Factory alum in a portfolio company of RareBreed, Roberto for RoboAmp. I had met him, and he reached out to me on Twitter, he DM'd me, and we were having a conversation. And I was really impressed with what he was doing, and I was disheartened again that he was struggling to raise capital. And so as I was trying to, put together a group to do an SPV and make a one-off investment, one of my advisors told me they wanted to invest in every company that I found. And so they wanted to put money for me to raise a fund. And so that led me on this pathway. And so that's how I got here to raising a fund, right? It's really 2 founders who changed my life, and one of them being from Capital Factory.
That's awesome. That's so great to hear. I've loved working with Roberto. He's still a part of the Capital Factory family. And so really glad that he was able to have that impact on you. So that's really interesting. You hear a lot with fund managers. You can have kind of, thesis or traction-led investments, or, more founder-led investments, and really take a bet on kind of the person and their ability to get things done. And it sounds like, you're super founder focused, which is great. I think we need more of those types of funds out there.
I like to say that we're in the middle, we do some traction data. We do some, at the end of the day, the early stage is so hard, right? A lot of these companies don't have much traction. They don't have much revenue, but you're always looking for what's that glimmer of hope of where's the $1 billion idea here? And so that's what we try to be good at, trying to see what's that glimmer that everybody else is overlooking. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I'm sure your own experience kind of being a multi-time founder informs a lot of that as well, which I think is really unique and interesting. Kind of chasing that thread a little bit and taking a step back, in your time as a founder, you experienced one exit and you had one experience that didn't necessarily work out. What was the most valuable lesson you learned in each of those experiences? Both the one that ended up in, an exit or what we would call success, and the one that didn't work out quite as you had planned.
The thing that I learned that was most impactful in me has more to do with the experience and less to do with my businesses. And it was, one, the importance of having a network. And that it's not out of your reach to build an amazing network, right? Like when I started my first company, I didn't know what it meant to network. I didn't know what it meant to have a network, right? And also, once you start to build a network, especially in this startup ecosystem, the startup world, you run in the space where you're around these amazing, talented people with these amazing, incredible ideas who are fundamentally trying to change the world around them, along with being around a lot of wealthy people who have already changed the world around them. And being around these people and meeting people from different backgrounds, different viewpoints, but who were all, chasing these crazy ideas and massive amounts of money. I learned the value of having a network, and I learned that the only opportunity that I couldn't get were the opportunities that I didn't try. Right. And to that point, when my second company didn't work out, I had a friend of mine asked me, so like they asked me, are you going to get a job? I said, yeah, I'm probably going to get a job. And they asked me where I was looking. And I was like, Tokyo, Singapore, Dubai, France, and Miami. And they were like, why are you looking at all these places? And like, who wants to work international? I said, why not? Like, who told you that you couldn't get a job in Tokyo? Who told you couldn't get a job in Dubai? Nobody. Nobody's ever told you that you couldn't. So why have you never tried? Like, if you don't want to, that's fine. But like, have you ever considered that you could do that? Right. And I learned that from being around people where like I had a friend whose father made his money investing in salt mines. Who invested in salt mines? like how do you have that in your portfolio? Or
who would even think of that? Yeah.
Right. Or like I knew a guy who paid for both of his kids to go to college because he was an early investor in a storage facility where people, store their stuff for their homes and things. Like he was like, yeah, I put some money in that storage facility, it's returned me enough where I was able to send both my kids to college. Like, what? Like these are things I never considered and was never exposed to. And I realized like, you could do anything in this world. Like there is nothing stopping you. I had a friend who told me he was going to go to college and get his MBA. And I asked him what school. He said, I'm going to go to the same school I went to my undergrad. I was like, well, you're going to apply for Harvard and Oxford and Yale and Stanford, right? He's like, I mean, I could, but why would I? Oxford? I'm like, yeah, you should put University of Tokyo on that list too. He's like, who would think to do that? I was like, that was the point. That is the whole point. And that was probably the most impactful thing that I learned on my journey of being an entrepreneur. Of like, literally, you could do whatever the hell you want in this world. You just got to put yourself out there to do it. And that's carried me through because even now, like the fund I'm raising at RareBreed, we're using a completely different structure. Like to the point where like people are always confused. Like, how are you able to do this? What are you doing? Like, literally, the world of VC is nothing but a legal structure. Like, you can move these things away. You can move these parts around. You can change these things up. Like, there is no set thing that says you have to do any of this stuff this way. And so being open to the idea that you can do things different ways was so really impactful for me.
Man, that's awesome. That's really inspiring. Like the only limitations you really have are the ones that you kind of self-impose to a certain extent. And I can definitely, being able to be around all these amazing founders and, interesting mentors and investors, I can totally see how that network really opens your eyes to those possibilities. That's one of the things I, love most about working with Capital Factory is the ability to talk to these really cool, interesting, awesome people, like you live on YouTube to answer questions for people. I'm really glad that you brought up kind of how you're raising your fund and the different structure that you're using, because we're seeing more and more of that recently. Do you want to just like quickly touch on the difference between the fund that you're raising at RareBreed Ventures and I guess what you would think of as a more traditional venture capital firm? Because I think there's some really interesting differences, and it opens up the opportunity for a lot more people that previously wouldn't be able to invest in this asset class of startups to really have that opportunity. So do you want to kind of just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, traditionally, when you raise a fund, you raise under a structure in which you're not allowed to talk about it publicly. You kind of already have to have a network built in. and that becomes a really difficult thing. But that's the only way we've ever seen funds done. In 2013, with the coming of the Jobs Act, one of the things they added in there was a new designation called 506C. A 506C allows you to raise a fund while publicly disclosing, so being able to talk about it publicly. The caveat is all the investors who invest in your fund must be accredited investors. Well, for most funds, all their investors are accredited investors anyway, right? So like, doesn't make much of a difference. The other thing is, what's really kind of popularized this is AngelsList came out with a thing called the rolling fund, which is a fund. Basically, you create a new fund every quarter, and people can subscribe to put money in your fund on a quarter by quarter basis. And part of it, they use the 506C designation so people could publicly solicit. And so that kind of popularized the idea and got people thinking like this is possible. But even then, the rolling funds have their own issues with the structure. So what I did was I said, I'm going to do a traditional fund, but I'm going to take all the best parts of a rolling fund. So we have a fund under 506C, so I can publicly talk about it. And then we have a technology partner, Anduin Transactions, which basically takes our subscription docs, which are the documents that people who invest in funds need to sign up. They take that and turn that into a guided e-signature process. So literally today, you can go to RareBreed.vc, click a button that says, click here to become an LP, and get access to our docs and sign up to be an LP in our fund without even ever talking to me, which has happened. I have several LPs who have done that. And I now have the ability where I can tweet about my fund. I can talk about it on podcasts and generate people who are willing to put money into our fund, which is a unique thing and a very different thing, right? I have people reach out to me all the time, like, "Hey, you sure you're not breaking any SEC rules?" Like, no, not breaking any rules. Don't try to think I'm getting in trouble here. But again, that just comes back to the idea of why not do things differently. Right. And so I just took the path that I thought would work best for me.
Yeah, that's great. I love that mindset. And I love how you're really actually putting it into practice by, to your point, taking the best parts of, the rolling fund and 506C and combining them with kind of the best parts of a traditional fund structure. So any accredited investors in the audience, if you're interested, rarebreed.vc, check out the LP documents. That's really great. I love seeing new innovative ways to increase access to capital. I think this is, one of the best ones that there is. Changing gears a little bit, I want to kind of go back to your time as a founder, because I always love speaking with investors that have experience actually, founding and building world-class companies. What kind of experiences, or I guess more generally, how does your overall experience being a founder inform your thought process as an investor?
So my experience as a founder allowed me to do two things. One, I can tell when a founder's BSing me. I've been there. I know what it looks like, right? Number two, it gives me a different level of empathy just because I've experienced the same things. And those are the positive parts. On the negative side, though, my experience as a founder also gives me additional biases that I understand, because as a founder, the industries that I was building companies in, I became an expert in. So now when I have founders pitch me today, here we are 6-8 years later, since I've been in the industry, I still have these thoughts of the things that I knew of the industry, right? And so if you're going to pitch me on something that's in e-commerce or in a crowdfunding and gifting space, I have all these already, chiseled in thoughts that I didn't have to kind of try to sweep away, because I need to remember times change, industries change. And that was one of the hardest things for me in the beginning, was getting my own biases out the way, because having been an entrepreneur, I want to look at things from an entrepreneur lens. It's no, I'm an investor now. It's a different lens. So that was actually the one negative. I see that, and you see this with a lot of former founders turned VCs, whatever industry they were founders in, they have so many opinions that are you're never going to get them off of, which can lead to hubris. And so I always try to avoid that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I feel like, when I'm talking to investors, it seems like there's always a little bit of a balance that you have to find between, you do have unique experience in this area, and that probably informs you a lot more than other investors that might not have that experience. But at the same time, you need to kind of remain open-minded and allow, world-changing entrepreneurs to change the world. So It's a really interesting balance to find. I think the last question that I have before we switch things over to start hearing from the audience is, what is one common mistake that you notice founders make in their initial meeting with you? I know you mentioned briefly founders BSing. That's obviously, everybody's got to kind of fake it till they make it to a certain extent. But what's kind of one big mistake that you notice with a lot of founders that you think could be easily avoided if you just kind of explain it?
I don't know if it's easily avoidable because it's kind of one of those things that comes with learning, but founders who go out to raise too early, right? I think founders see these stories of people who raise pre-product, pre-revenue, like if, there's other people out there that can do it, why can't I raise that money? What I would tell you is 9 times out of 10, if you see a founder that's raised money pre-product or pre-revenue, has nothing to do with the business. Like literally has zero to do with the business. It had everything to do with that founder's network.
Mm-hmm.
So if you do not have the same network, we are not comparing apples to apples. Because at the end of the day, all things considered, if I look at their business and your business just purely on what the business is, not funding theirs either, right? And I'll give you an example. There was a company that we looked at where we were interested in. It was pre-launch. They had a product, but pre-launch, hadn't made any revenue. But here's the thing. The founder was on their third company. Their second company, they sold to TikTok. And with this new company, they already had lined up a pipeline of over 50 potential customers as B2B products, but they were going to do a closed beta with 6 customers. Two of those 6 customers were Uber Eats and Yelp. That's why I could make an investment in a company that's got a product. But when you read the headline on TechCrunch, all you see is RareBreed invest in a founder in New York who's pre-product, who's pre-revenue, but with a product.
In a closed beta, yeah.
In a closed beta. And everybody's like, well, I have more traction than that. Why can't I get that funding? Well, because it's not about it, nothing with the business. It's the founder's network and the things they had already done. So if you don't have those two things, we're not comparing apples to apples. And so founders see these stories and think, oh, I can go raise money now. I got my product. It's like, no, there's still some more you need to figure out. And I know some of the questions I asked about that, so I can dive into that a little bit more.
Yeah, no, I think I totally agree with your assessment. It's advice we give at Capital Factory a lot. It's, build relationships before you're actually actively fundraising so that you have that network. And so that when you actually are really ready, you can go and actually be effective with that campaign. So that's great. I think now let's kind of shift gears a little bit and dive into some of the audience questions. Look like they're rolling through. Awesome. Guys, keep them coming. We're going to go all the way till 3 p.m. Answer as many questions as we can. This first question comes from John Colfon. John says, we're a startup with an MVP ready, but yet to gain traction due to lack of funds and COVID-19 lockdown in the UK. How can we raise funds without any proven traction? Please advise.
So this goes back to the point I was just making. It's really hard if you do not have a network of people who just want to back you because they like you. Right? If you don't have that, raising money without proven traction is really, really hard. Really hard, right? Now, where you look for to raise money at that stage, this is what the friends and family round is for. Friends and family round does not actually mean your actual friends and family, right? Like they're included in it, but it just means your network and extended network. So what you want to do is you want to start off with people who may have an affinity to you or what you're building. What I mean is that it's like you want to start off with people who you've worked with before or who have worked at the same companies you've worked at, people who went to the same school as you, or people who are executives in the industry that you're working in who may just want to see your product exist, right? Those are going to be the people who are going to put money in super early because they just want to see it happen. They're not even thinking about, the big returns or anything else. Like, oh, this is something I just want to see. I can see where the value is, right? People who understand the value inherently, it's always a good place to start. What I would tell you, go ahead.
No. Keep going. This is great. This is gold.
And so what I would tell you, though, it is not an investor doesn't owe you money. Just because you put a product together, nobody owes you anything. You got to remember this, right? Especially at the early stages, right? When we're talking about that early round, you're asking people typically for their own individual hard-earned money, right? This is money that they worked for, that they're giving to you to return them more capital. Nobody owes you that. First and foremost, like all founders need to understand that, right? Number two is you kind of need to figure out how to start to get traction already. You can't use money as an excuse, right? Because this is what founders do very often. Like, oh, I got this product, but we don't have customers. But as soon as we get money, we can do marketing. And once we start marketing, we know we're going to get money. Well, how are you going to use that money for marketing? You're going to pay for ads? What ads are going to work? You don't know. You got to go figure that out and try that out. So that means you're going to use this money to try and figure out what ads work. Sounds like an easy way to blow the money. And you're like, no. We're going to hire a consultant to come in and do it. Okay, how do you know if that consultant's going to be good or not? Because you don't even know what works. So you're going to go hire a consultant who's going to come in. You're going to pay him a bunch of money, and you're going to look up 2-3 months from now, and you haven't gotten the traction you thought you should get. Now, is that because the consultant didn't do a good job? Does that have something more to do with the market? Is there something to do with the product? You don't know, but you've already blown some money because you paid this consultant. Again, another easy way to blow money. What happens is founders tend to want to raise money to try and use it to solve problems they haven't figured out how to solve. That is an easy way to blow your money. And yes, I understand it's hard to get traction without the money, right? But you typically have 2 ways to get customers. You either got time or you got money. Those are 2 things you have. Whichever one is the one you have is the one you use. So if you go and say, hey, Mac, how am I supposed to get customers if I don't have money? Glad you asked. For my first company, you know how we got our first 1,000 customers? We cold tweeted people. It was a crowdfunding. It was a platform for people to crowdfund money for gifts. So you know what I did? Every day I would spend 4 to 5 hours on Twitter looking for people talking about their birthday and say, hey, happy birthday. That's great. Tell your friends to put money towards your gift on our website. That's how we got our first 1,000 customers. For my second company, which was a B2B company, we were going after, it was like an e-commerce platform. So we were looking for sellers. So what did I do? I created an Instagram page and just reposted products from sellers I was excited about. And what that do? Every time one of those sellers would always like or comment on our post. That gave me a light touch to then be able to do a warm introduction, and where I could then follow up with an email and they had a touch point with me. Using that strategy, we signed up 120 sellers in 2 weeks at $20 a month pre-product. And then I used that to go raise $250,000. It's doable. It's not easy. Like I was spending 6 to 7 hours on Instagram a day trying to figure this stuff out and do it, right? And I did it for 6 weeks before I got to where we needed to be. But at the end of the day, as innovative and unique as you're trying to be with your product, you need to be just as innovative and unique in your customer acquisition. Because at the end of the day, customer acquisition is what gets you paid, either with revenue or with funding. But that is your job to figure out. Don't be looking for money as an excuse to figure that out.
Man, I hope the founders in the audience are taking notes. We got like incredibly valuable information going around now. I love those strategies. I actually had some points to add, but you covered all of them in way more in depth than I ever would. I guess the only thing I would add is that, not enough founders take that strategy that you mentioned of looking for executives in your industry or people that want your product and, pitching them as potential investors. If it's somebody that's going to be using this product, then not only are they a potential investor if they're kind of at the executive level and can make angel investments, they're also potential customers in the future. So that's an avenue that I do not see enough founders taking, and I'm so glad that you mentioned it. And then in terms of building traction, all those strategies are great. I think, there's tons of non-monetary ways to build traction. Start a wait list, go on platforms like Product Hunt to kind of build hype around your product. There's lots of different ways that you can kind of build traction and show that this product is going to be used by the end consumer that don't necessarily need money. And I think just to condense all that down, you said it perfectly. Don't use money as an excuse to why you haven't solved a specific problem. That's so great. So moving on to the next question. Glad to see that those are still flowing. The next question comes to us from Kay Tejo. I hope I said your name right. But Kay Tejo asks, hi, Mac and Jake. Can you shed some light on ways to break the deadlock between finding traction and seed money in hard tech startups? So I think we touched a little bit on this earlier, but specifically within hard tech, Mac, given your experience with your top secret security clearance, maybe you have some additional insights for specifically this scenario.
I would tell you, when you're talking about hard tech or deep tech, those are going to be very industry specific, right? Fundraising is going to be very industry specific. what you want to do is you want to make sure you're targeting investors who specialize in that industry, right? And take your cues from them. And what I would tell you is try to put together a list of investors who invest in the type of hard tech you're building. And then what you do is you start to follow some of them on Twitter, Clubhouse, and see if any of them have any blog posts. And just start reading through some of the stuff they're putting out, because they're going to tell you in those mediums what it is they look for, what stage they come in. You'll get a lot of information from that. And then it's about, start reaching out to them, because like hard tech investors understand like those are capital intensive. The other thing I would tell you that I don't think enough hard tech entrepreneurs use is that there are these things called SBIR grants, right? These are federal grants where I believe it's 13 federal agencies that put out a list of topics every year that they want solved. They're very broad. And there's almost every startup can find a way to fit into one of these topics. And these grants go from they usually come in two phases. They go from anywhere from like 100 to 500K for phase one, and can go anywhere from 800 to 5 million for phase two, right? And typically hard tech startups fit into those designations really easily. Now, granted, it's still a grant writing process, dealing with the federal government is a whole to do, right? But it's non-dilutive capital. And it's non-dilutive capital specifically for product development, because that is the biggest issue with hard tech. Is it's usually capital intensive because there's a lot of R&D in the product development. So I would tell you, look at things like that, and then be very strategic in which investors you're looking to find, because traction is going to be hard, right? And then also like there are just some hard tech companies that they don't get built unless you have the right network, right? I know the guy who, so everybody knows in the airports they got the machine where you got to put your hand up and scan, right? I know the guy who started the company to build that. He happened to be a professor at Stanford. And so when he set out to build it, he raised like a couple $1 million day one, because it was a hard problem. They need a whole bunch of money for R&D, but like if he doesn't have the network he had, there's no way he's able to build that, right? And so like some of those things, it's hard tech and deep tech, there's some unique challenges there. But look at some government programs and be very specific in the investors you want to talk to.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, doing your research on investors is incredibly important. And I love some of those strategies that you laid out. If they have a blog post detailing a thesis on something that you're building a product to kind of address, reach out and, mention that article. The way to get people to respond to cold emails or non-warm intros is to be highly relevant and to show that you've done your research ahead of time. The second part of that is I love that you mentioned the SBIR grants and opportunities. At Capital Factory, on our 8th floor, actually, we have the Army Futures Command Army Applications Laboratory, which is essentially the public-facing version of that whole entity. And their whole entire job is to meet with startups and figure out ways to get them grant funding through those SBIR opportunities. So definitely check out those solicitations. I think you mentioned there's 13 different departments. The government's huge. They're not just looking for defense technology, right? They're looking for technology that helps people in Army bases connect to daycare centers and, data analytics and literally everything under the sun. I want to say the U.S. military is probably the largest enterprise in the country. And so they're looking for things in all different areas. So really love that you brought that up. And another kind of good thing to note about that is, you've got the phase one grants and the phase two grants. Once you get into the phase two grants, the government is actually looking for you to become a dual use technology and actually use this technology for commercial use cases. And they open up additional funding for companies that can do that. So it actually will make it easier for you to pitch your company to a VC if that VC notices that if I invest $2 million in this company, I'm going to get $2 million in matching funds through the government in totally non-dilutive funding. So it's really aligning incentives all around. And I'm so glad that you're aware of that and that you touched on that. It's a really underutilized resource in this area. Next question comes to us from Joshua Walloon. Joshua asks, what do you think about the future of VC and crowdfunding? Really awesome question.
So I think crowdfunding's here to stay, right? I think there's going to be more overlap the further we go, the more comfortable VCs are going to get. And we're also going to see new structures, right? Like crowdfunding still in its infancy, right? Over the next 15, 20 years, we're going to see it mature. We're going to see different kind of structures coming out. Republic has their crowd safe, right? We're going to see other kind of structures like that happen. There's still some VCs today who aren't excited about investing in companies that have already done some crowdfunding. I don't have a problem with it. I think it's trending in the right direction. I will say, and this may be controversial, but whatever. I do think there are probably going to be some additional regulations that are going to come from crowdfunding or should come from crowdfunding. I have seen several equity crowdfunding campaigns where, in the equity crowdfunding campaigns, they have all the front-facing stuff, all the pretty stuff, the graphs, the picture stuff. But then you go to the actual filings. Most people don't actually read the actual filings for these. But when you go through it and you look at the financials and you look at some other stuff, you find some wild things in there. You'll see companies that are they set their valuation way too high, right? And then all the stuff they put on the webpage, we've grown by 2,000% year over year. Well, when you went from 2 users to 20 users, sure, that's awesome, but this can be misleading, right? And so I'm always cautious of that. I've seen some companies raise some significant amount of capital where, as from a VC standpoint, looking at those numbers and what they've done, like some of them almost feel like scams, right? Just to be perfectly honest. And so I do think we're going to see additional regulations and guardrails, and we're going to see more transparency in companies that are doing equity crowdfunding. And as that happens, I think we're also going to see more and more VCs, following along. I also hope that one day VCs will be able to raise money through crowdfunding, right? And I also end with this: crowdfunding is not a solve-all, right? It's like anything else. Just because you're doing equity crowdfunding or a reward-based crowdfunding, you still got to build up a customer base. You still got to build up traction. And very often, crowdfunding campaigns are tied very closely to a really good PR campaign. And it's got to be a PR campaign over the life of the campaign, because what happens is every time you have a piece of PR come out, you get a spike in people going to your crowdfunding campaign. And so you need to stretch that out over the life of the campaign. I've seen companies make the mistake where they do all the PR up front. And so they get all these spikes in the front, and then the rest of the campaign kind of stays flat. Well, you kind of want to do it over time. Mm-hmm. But I'm bullish on it.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I agree with you as well, in the sense that I've looked at some deals on Republic and Seed Invest and these other platforms, and you look at the valuation and maybe the company in the past, and you're like, I just don't understand how you got from here to here. So it's always important to do your research. But yeah, I do definitely think it's here to stay. I'm glad it exists as a resource for founders and investors, because there are a lot of really good deals out there. I guess personally, when I think of like, what does it look like in the future? I've seen a couple of companies do this so far, but I actually think that in the future, companies are going to be raising traditional venture rounds where venture funds are coming in and taking half of the round and they're kind of filling out the rest. But then I think we're going to start seeing companies actually carving out a little bit of allocation in that round to actually host on a platform like Republic, Seed Invest, et cetera, to allow people that maybe aren't accredited investors or maybe don't have thousands of dollars to invest to still be able to participate alongside them and, feel involved in the process. I saw one company do that just to give the opportunity to some of their customer base to actually invest in the company alongside them. And I really loved that. So I think we're going to be seeing more of that.
I completely agree. And I should say Republic is one of the better ones out there. So, that they're not one of the bad actors. Full disclosure, I'm a venture partner for Republic. Got to be a company man.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we're big fans of Republic here at Capital Factory as well. We've worked closely with them. A lot of our companies have gotten funded through the platform. So can't speak more highly about them. So moving on to the next question, looks like we've got a question from Ronnie Green. Ronnie, good to see you. Alba Pear, really excited about it. Ronnie's actually a new member of Capital Factory Mac. So Ronnie comes to us and asks, what proven traction does RareBreed look for?
So this goes on a case by case basis, right? There are companies where there may be pre-traction, pre-revenue. We have one company in our portfolio. It's pre-product. It's a hardware company, clearly. And then the other side, we have companies we have one company we invested in that got 35,000 users in the first 2.5 months, right? So it goes by case basis. It's more so understanding and having a founder that can articulate how they get their customers, right? Like, did you use something like unique or crazy strategy? Like, you got a million views on TikTok, or do you just have a standard pay strategy where, it costs you $20 to acquire a customer and the lifetime value of that customer is trending in the direction of $120, right? Like it ranges, but it really comes down to, I'd say, these three pillars, right? Having understanding or being able to talk through customer acquisition, experience, and retention. If you can focus on those three things, you can typically do pretty well. And if you can be able to explain that to us well, that's kind of what we look for.
Awesome. So again, founders in the audience, take note. Customer acquisition, experience, and retention. Those are kind of the three main pillars. I love that. I think I might write that down and steal it a little bit myself. This is kind of a mental exercise for founders to go through. Yeah. Well, awesome. So next question comes to us from Miguel Ortiz. And guys, keep adding the questions in the chat. These have been really good. So Miguel asks, do you invest in hardware plus IoT? I guess to just add on to that, how do you think about some more capital intensive businesses like maybe hardware or IoT in general?
The answer is yes. And the big thing is, for us, when it comes to hardware, the specific thing is looking at hardware in industries that have lacked innovation for 10 or more years, right? And so when you think of a company in the IoT space or hardware space, it's a company that I really liked and I saw early on. I wish I could have made an investment in. It's a company called Windmill. Windmill makes the first Bluetooth and smart in-window AC unit. Why? Because like in 2021, in the world of Nest and Alexa and everything else, doesn't it make sense to have an AC unit you control with your phone? Like,
absolutely.
Like, yeah, exactly, right?
Yeah.
So things like that are really interesting to us, and specifically because they are capital intensive. If it's in an industry that's lacking innovation, then you typically have a longer runway before competitors start to really come in and try to fight you for it. And so, as opposed to other physical products, when you have that longer runway, then it's really about doubling down on your early customers and trying to get to that 2 million in revenue piece, right? Like, how can we get you to 2 million? Because typically, once you hit that 2 million in revenue, you're getting to a point where you start to become interesting to a lot of other VCs, and then that's when we just take you on the road show to New York. That's where all the physical product, VCs are. And so that's how I think about hardware and IoT.
Awesome. Yeah, it's really interesting. It seems like in venture capital, there's just all different kind of opinions. So it's good to hear kind of your insights and how you specifically think about it. So this next question came to us from the audience when they were registering on Eventbrite, actually. But I think it's a really good question. And honestly, Mac, I just kind of want your opinion on it. But can you walk us through your thought process when looking at or evaluating a startup's valuation?
Here's the thing about early stage valuation. It's an art. It's not a science. There is no number. I don't care about your revenue. I don't care about your traction. Like, the way valuations at the early stage is typically done is some formula of how much money does the founder want to raise, how much equity does the VC want to own, and who has what leverage, right? So if you come to me and say, hey, Mac, I'm raising $1 million, and I say, great, we want to own 10%. So what is that? And so, but we're only going to give you but we only want to do 500K, right? So we want 500K for 10%. You want to raise $1 million. Your valuation is now 5 million, because our 500K plus somebody else's 500K gets to $1 million, which is then 20% of the company, right? And so for that to be 20% of the company, that means we got to get to a valuation of 5 million. Like, that's simple, right? It's math. And then where the valuation starts to augment on is based on who has what leverage. In most cases, more often than not, the VCs are going to have the leverage. But if you have a company that's growing, the more traction you have, you can be like, well, Mac, we want to raise $1 million. And I understand you want 10%, but we're only giving up 10%. So your 500K can only be worth 5% because we want a $10 million cap. And by the way, we got several other VCs interested. Well, now I got to decide, like, do I like this company enough where I want to own 10%, but I can only get 5 at the dollar amount I'm putting in. So I either got to put in more money or I got to fight off with all these other VCs, right? And so really leverage is what pushes and pulls on how the valuation goes up or down. But it starts off as a simple math of how much are you raising and how much do the VCs want to own, and then the leverage is what moves it from there, which allows for crazy wide changes.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think that's great. I love the way that you described that. And I think one thing founders need to keep in mind is that it's a negotiation, right? You're rarely going to get the exact valuation that you want. And a lot of times the investors aren't going to get exactly what they want either. I like to think about it as a function between, at least from a founder perspective, when you're thinking about kind of the acceptable range of valuations, it's a function of how much money do I need to get to that next inflection point of the business to where, maybe we're starting to get some cash flow, or then we can go raise some more money that'll help us continue to grow, and a function of how much are you willing to dilute yourself, right? So kind of going back to that math, if you're only willing to sell, 10 to 20% of the company, and that you need $1 million to, get to that next inflection point as a company, you can kind of do that math and you'll figure out what your kind of acceptable valuation range is. So that's kind of how I think about it. And
let me touch on that a little bit though, but understand this, right? Founders get all up in arms of like, forget the VCs, it's just the money, like, get the best valuation you can. Here's the thing. The average investment in a company lasts longer than the average marriage in the United States, right? That's number one. So once you take this money, we are tied together. That's number one. Number two, neither party should be trying to outdo the other, right? You should not be trying to get the best valuation you possibly can because you try to stick it to the VCs. And the VCs should not be trying to give you the lowest valuation they possibly can because they're trying to stick it to you. Because at the end of the day, it is a partnership. Because here's what happens, right? Let's say it's a company I really want to invest in, but the founder's trying to stick me on the valuation. But companies don't just grow linearly. There's no guarantee you're going to keep doing well. What happens when your company is doing okay and the COVID happens, and all of a sudden your revenue falls off a cliff, and you're now burning through money, and now you need more money, and you can't go get a loan? Guess who you got to come back to? All those VCs and investors you floored on valuation. And so now they still want to see the company happen. They still want to see things work out. But guess what's going to happen this time around? You're going to get cut down the valuation in ways that you never expected or wanted. Now, if we start off amenable from the beginning, we're a team. We can work through that, right? And so think of it like that. Like you're building a partnership. Everybody wants to walk away with a win-win. Nobody should walk away feeling like they got over on the other. And if they do, you're setting yourself up for problems. If there's ever issues in the future, all those negotiations that happened earlier are going to bubble back to the surface. So be careful with that, founders.
Yeah. Another thing to take note of during this conversation. Absolutely. It's essentially a marriage that lasts longer than most actual marriages do. So take it seriously. Next question comes to us from Brooke Sinclair. Brooke asks, is RareBreed open to supply chain? And I guess just to make that a little bit more broader, how do you think about supply chain and how that's going to grow over the next 10 years?
Hi, Brooke. How are you? Yes, the RareBreed does invest in supply chain. And the way I think about it is we just saw the reason why we need to innovate in our supply chain. When COVID happened and China shut down, nobody could get anything. Like, clearly, innovation needs to happen here. Where one country shuts down and the rest of the world can't get products, that's ridiculous. Or we now are trying to get the vaccine out, and we're seeing there are issues with the supply chain trying to get the vaccine out, right? Like there is so much room for innovation in supply chain in so many different industries that we're going to see more and more innovation. And I think we're going to see a boom of innovation coming soon as a response to what we've seen happen in COVID, right? So I'm actually really bullish on supply chain.
Awesome. Yeah, I totally agree. And I think you're right. COVID really kind of put a spotlight on how important that is to everything that we do here in America, is having some kind of reliable, sustainable supply chain. Next question, and this might be our last question depending on how long we go. So thanks everyone for tuning in. These are really, really awesome questions. But this next question comes to us from Ronnie Green. And Ronnie asks, how do you like to be pitched a go-to-market from a founder? And again, to just kind of broaden that a little bit, how do you think about go-to-market strategy, and, how do you think about it in terms of a business?
So when the founder pitches me about their go-to-market, I want you to be able to connect your go-to-market to the traction, right? How do what you do or what you've been doing work towards the traction you've gotten? Or what are the unique things you're going to do to gain traction? And why do you believe that those strategies are going to allow you to rise above the noise in your industry, right? Everybody's got competitors, right? So how does your go-to-market strategy help you rise above the noise of all your competitors, right? And one thing I should say, right? I don't care, like, this is also industry to industry and business model to business model, right? So, like, if you're in an industry that's super saturated and super competitive, like dating or e-commerce or social media, I don't care how amazing your go-to-market strategy is. At that point, the only thing that matters is your traction. Like the only thing I'm ever going to look at is like, so how much traction you got, right? Like unless you got somebody to give you a ton of money up front, like a clubhouse, then how much traction do you have and how are you getting that traction? Like go-to-market don't matter as much anymore at that point. It's just like, how are you figuring this out? But generally speaking, when founders pitch me, I want you to be able to connect your go-to-market to the traction and what you've been able to do and why you feel like that is a good solution, whether it be short-term or long-term.
That's great. And yeah, that's how you show that your go-to-market is actually working. So really great advice there. So it looks like we're coming up at the end of our time here. Mac, thanks so much for being here. But before we go, I want everybody to figure out how they can find you. So, obviously you can invest in RareBreed if you are an accredited investor at rarebreed.vc. But how else can people kind of get in contact with you? How would you prefer? I know you're big on Clubhouse. Here, this time's yours. Take it away.
So the best way to find me is probably on Twitter at Mac Conwell. It's in the picture here. That's where I'm most active. That's the easiest place to find me. Shoot me a DM, send me a tweet. I have a caveat, right? I do take cold emails. And I do take cold DMs. That does not mean I get to read every cold email and every cold DM. So please, if you send me something and I don't get to it, keep sending it. Hopefully at some point I see it. I get like 50 to 80 of these a day. So like it's just not enough time in the day for me to see them all. But don't get discouraged. I try to see as many as I can. I really, really do. But yeah, the best way to find me is at Matt Conwell on Twitter. The name's Mac the VC, and look forward to talking to many of you.
Awesome. That's a funny story. That's actually how I first got in contact with you, Mac, was through Twitter. So I've been a follower for a while, and this was a real pleasure. Thanks so much for spending the time, and really awesome, actionable kind of insights and advice that we got. So I loved it. We got to do more stuff together.
Sounds good, man. Thank you for the time, and hopefully I was helpful to all the entrepreneurs out there.
Absolutely. Yeah. So everybody in the audience, thanks so much for being here today. I think we're just going to cut it there. You know how to get in contact with Mac. If you're interested in learning more about Capital Factory, go to capitalfactory.com. Also, follow me on Twitter. My Twitter is at Jake_O'Shea. My content's not quite as informative as Mac, but sometimes I got some jokes up there. So feel free to check it out. And anyways, we're going to leave it from there. Mac, we got some awesome RareBreed founders to introduce you to from Capital Factory after this. And everybody make sure to tune in next month. We're going to have another great event.